Hey everyone, Reed here with Big Strong Book, here today to talk about The Crack in Space by Philip K. Dick. Now, I don't have a physical copy with me. This was an ebook read, but it's been a while since I've read really any of Dick, so it's good to get back to him. And this was, I'm at the point now with his bibliography that I've read, if we consider the works in the Library of America collection of Philip K. Dick, that 3 volume set, if we consider those to be the quote unquote like canonical or greatest hits of Philip K. Dick, or at least the 13 odd books that are the most central or the most important, and there's probably cases to be made for some that were left out and cases to be made for those within the 3 volume set that they shouldn't be there. But anyways, I've read those. I haven't done reviews of all of them on the channel, but I have read all 13 of those, plus The Cosmic Puppets, which I did review on this channel, and that being one of his pulp novels from the 50s. And I was feeling it was high time just to get back into reading him. He's one of those authors that you can read both so quickly and take your time, and he's one of those that it's enjoyable. It's an enjoyable light read. It's all of his books pretty much, maybe except for the Transmigration of Timothy Archer and Valis, are very fast paced, and it is so great to then, after the fact, kind of go over them, really just to marinate within the ideas that are present. That is, if he pulls them off and executes everything great. The Crack in Space is not one of his finer works, at least from my point of view. I would say the works of his, or the work of his, prior to this that I probably disliked the most was, as I mentioned, The Transmigration of Timothy Archer. That being the final novel that he wrote, the final book published in his lifetime, and it represented, following off from Valis and the Divine Invasion, it represented kind of a new period for Dick, something that he was starting to step into, and then unfortunately he died. And The Crack in Space is interesting. I think it's not. I disliked it. It isn't. My dislike is not in a similar respect to The Transmigration of Timothy Archer, and it is pretty interesting because The Crack in Space was one of his mid-60s, early to mid-60s novels. And within that period, he's really starting to develop. He, I think maybe right before or right after The Crack in Space, published arguably my favorite of his, one of my top 3 certainly, The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. He had come off of a few years prior, I think, The Man in the High Castle, which I'm not a huge fan of, but I respect and I can understand why people love that. And he was still a few years away from Ubik, Androids, and the like. And so this is one of those, I don't want to label them as just when you're writing all your novels on amphetamines, some of them are going to be duds. So, I mean, that's true, I think, with writing in general, but certainly when you're literally writing on speed the whole time, things are going to slip through the cracks, no pun intended. And so then we come to The Crack in Space. Now, what is it about? Well, it almost has 3 or 4 different beginnings, and even though I was accustomed to the fast pace with which he moves, and he'll just throw a bunch of character names at you, and you're not really sure who is going to be one of the major players, he throws at us people who are cryogenically frozen so that they can gain employment after overpopulation is fixed, or when the job market opens up. So we have that. We have a presidential race in which one of the major candidates is black, and in this universe, the United States has never had a black president, and they're fearful that it could spark a race war, or that it could lead to a race conflict leading up to the election. So we have that. We have a like mutant synthetic man running a brothel satellite, and then we have a kind of promiscuous doctor who has hidden away his mistress, and his wife, who is an abortionist, sending out a private detective to do some deeper digging. So we have all of those. And, you know, because I have a whole bunch of Dick's novels physically, but then also in ebook format. And I remember in determining what I was going to read, you know, you read the back of the book, you read the synopsis. In The Crack in Space, the synopsis essentially was that, and I'll say it here because this is the core thrust of the plot. Essentially, a portal to an alternate dimension is discovered in this doctor's car, and it is an Earth that is very similar to our own, but one in which humans have not really evolved, one in which is technologically very different, but that people think it could be great to then ship all of the bibs off, so they don't, you know, they can just wipe their hands of it. They don't even have to worry about it. That just intrigued the hell out of me. I was like, okay, cool, I'm on board. But when it takes almost, goodness, I want to say like 30-40% of the book, or at least it seemed like that, before we even got to that alternate Earth. So the hook, it really takes a third of the novel. Granted, you know, this book is 200 pages long or so. So commitment-wise, I mean, I read this book in an afternoon. It's an afternoon book when you have nothing else to do. And so when we get to that point, you know, your interest is already waning a little. And then, you know, when Dick has all of these threads going, he has tension for this presidential candidate, Jim Briskin, this black candidate who is, you know, he's right up there in the polls, and he could win. And he's kind of got a vested interest in this because the broader government is having difficulties with terraforming other planets. And if they can just ship people to this alternate Earth, that could really, you know, kind of give him a boost. And so much of the novel focuses on him and this presidential race. And I think maybe for the time in the 60s, this, you know, in the midst of the civil rights movement, it's a rather novel concept, perhaps, for the idea of a prominent black presidential candidate. Obviously, in the world today, it is nothing new. We obviously, and so it's kind of lost that kind of I don't want to say edge, but it's lost the potential grains of interest that many other things by Dick still do, that still stand the test of time. Thinking of like the Half-Life people in Ubik, the very concept of Ubik, telepaths and precogs, all of those things in his novels, even the wild psychotic drug exposures in Three Stigmata, you know, so many of his novels, you can point to so many different things and say, and he has done alternate dimensions better. Granted, a lot of those better instances were after The Crack in Space, but a lot of those remain novel concepts, maybe not in the idea itself, but in Dick's insight into it. It is still interesting, it is still new. And so to spend most of a book, you know, about an alternate dimension Earth, just focusing on one of the least interesting characters, and not to say, and then he shifts the focus more towards the end, towards this kind of weird synthetic human guy named George Walt, who's the proprietor of this brothel satellite. And when they introduce kind of as they call them, like the Peking men, these humanoid-esque creature people that inhabit this alter Earth. Um, the story starts to pick up some, but then with just it's almost like the story glitches out at points. Just narratively with the alter Earth kind of it jumps ahead far into the future, and then a lot of the bibs that are sent over they kind of disappear and all of that, and the presence of George. I mean, George Walt was not terribly interesting to begin with, and then a random focus on him as an antagonist makes him even less interesting, and it is as if this novel should have been a lot longer. The beginning has the pacing of that, and then right when we get past the alter Earth introduction and into further things, then it then it's like Dick speeds up because it's like almost as if he's under a deadline and he just has to figure out some sort of ending, an ending, and then he just kind of goes with whatever he thinks will work. And he takes the least interesting way out of the story, which he doesn't often do from what I've read by him. He takes an interesting route out towards like a final act of the story, but in this it loses me, and I was lost from the beginning with just kind of the mire of the beginning, and then you kind of pull me back in with this other Earth concept, but then you start to lose me again. So it again, the beginning feels like it is act one of a much longer work, or one that at least takes its time a little more and really develops. I think this was a problem, or an issue, maybe not a problem, but an issue I had with something like Man in the High Castle, where it's been a couple years now since I've read it last, but it felt like there were so many things being developed, and in the short length of the novel, nothing could really pay off, or he picks at least what for today's audience is not the most interesting way out. Maybe for the time it was, and that's all good and well. It just doesn't. The novels don't age well. There's not with the Crack in Space. Unfortunately, there's not a timeless quality. This is kind of a Dick novel, I think, that you can skip. And I'm at that point now where I love him, and that is established, and he is one of my favorite authors. And now I'm kind of bouncing around the rest of his bibliography, so to speak, and knowing that not all of them are going to be hits. And The Crack in Space, from my point of view, was not a hit. So I'll probably read one of his novels here soon. Maybe one of his pulpier novels. You kind of know what you're getting with that. It's just that the mire of the 60s for him was think a little more broadly, hit or miss perhaps. But again, my beyond what is in the Library of America collection, I have read nothing else that he wrote in the 60s. So still to be determined. So The Crack in Space, if you have read it, let me know what you think. And as always, I will see you guys next time.